All right, so let's get our handbooks and let's refresh our memory about story structure. Oh, before you even open your book, I'm going to see what you remember, okay? First of all, there are 5 elements of literature that we identify. If you think about that picture in the handbook, the space picture, and the spaceship is traveling through space on a journey. Okay, does everybody kind of have that picture in mind? All right, so one thing I really like about the whole breakdown of story structure is that it breaks down into several really nice groups of 5. And I'm going to see if I can find a group of 5 character types that I don't know. I can only really think of 3 off the top of my head, but there might be some more. So what are the 5 elements of literature that we want to think about when we start thinking about any story? We have some volunteers. Oh, I don't believe that none of you remember this. Come on now, don't be shy.
The character and settings.
Okay, those are 2 of them, character and setting. Those are 2 of the 5. Great, thank you, Clara. Did I just lose somebody? Let's see. No, I didn't. Okay. All right, character and setting. Okay, what are some of the other important things? For some reason, the screen is hopping around. I don't know why.
The solution or problem.
The problem, and that's a special word. What do we call that special word? Starts with a C. Did you raise your hand, Tyler? Okay, go ahead.
The conflict.
The conflict, exactly. And the conflict is the problem. You're right, Elton. It's the problem that the main character is trying to solve. Okay, and so we got characters, setting, conflict, and then there are 2 more. Tylee.
The climax.
Well, that's part of this thing that I'm thinking of. It's this thing.
Is it the denouement?
That's part of this thing.
The plot?
The plot. Yes, it's the most obvious one, isn't it? But everybody wants to try to break it down before we talk about the whole thing. And remember, the plot is kind of in an arc shape, right? Starts out on the ground level, it ends up on the ground level, and then there's a big peak in the middle somewhere, or a little bit closer toward the end, actually, in most stories. Okay, so we got character, conflict, setting, plot, and theme. Oh, what's the last one?
Theme.
Theme. Right. Okay. Now, that's 5. Characters, conflict, setting, plot, and theme. And then the plot itself, oh, let's talk, the conflict can be broken down into 5 different types. Let's see if y'all can remember this without looking in your book. Carly.
Should I just do one?
Well, you can do as many as you can think of.
Okay, man against man, man against nature, man against society, man against himself, and man against God.
Or
God's.
God, or starts with an F. Oh, you're so close. Well, that's good enough. God or fate, right? Okay, so man against man against himself, man against society, man against God or fate, man against nature. Great, good job. Okay. And sometimes there'll be more than one of those, but usually there's one that's the main one, right? Okay, super. Does everybody remember all of these things as we're stirring our brains around and reminding ourselves? Okay, now here's the tricky part that all of you tried to give me pieces of a few minutes ago. This is the plot, and the plot also breaks down into nice stages of 5 stages. And so remember, they're represented on ovals on that arc shape. Is everybody getting that picture in their head? Now, this time I did lose somebody. Who did I lose?
Elton.
Elton. Okay. All right. Let's see. There he goes. All right. Okay. Sorry, Elton. We lost you there for a minute. All right, so we're talking about the 5 parts of the plot. So what's the first oval there? Who remembers? Okay, Carly.
Exposition.
The exposition. Tell us what the exposition is.
It's like explaining like the setting and the characters and all that stuff.
Great. And remember, I told y'all it's like going to a play and the curtains open and you see who's in the play and where it is. You see the set, you see people milling around on the stage or singing or something. And that's where the author is inviting you into the world of the story. The author has created a world. He wants or she wants to invite you in. And so that's what the exposition is. Before you get smacked with a problem, you've got to find your footing in this world that the author has created, right? Okay. And you can get to feel acclimated and comfortable a little bit. And then once you do, and once all of that is sort of settled and you sort of get a sense of the situation, then we have the second oval, the second plot stage. And what happens in that plot stage? We're going to look back at the picture here in just a minute. I'm not expecting you to remember all this all the time. I've got it in the handbook. I just want to kind of get your brain cells working here. So what happens in the second oval?
The conflict.
Yes, the conflict is then introduced. So before the author smacks you with a problem, the author creates the world, lets you in, and then the conflict is introduced. This is where you find out what the story is really going to be about. And it can be any of those 5 types that we talk about. And also it can be stated as a question. Will so-and-so be able to do such and such? Right? Okay. And so as soon as the conflict is introduced, also in that second oval, we have something that starts happening. Do y'all, somebody tell me what that thing is that starts happening in that second oval? Kylie.
Is it the rising action?
Yes, the rising action. The character starts to think things and say things and do things in order to what?
Solve the problem.
Solve the problem, exactly. All right. And the more the character does things, the more tense the action gets until we get right up to the peak of the action where we know the problem is either going to be solved happily or it's going to be solved badly. But one way or another, unlike in real life, the problem is going to get solved. And if it doesn't, readers go away really mad, right? They just want some kind of finality to it, right? Some kind of closure. So in a good story, the problem gets solved. In a book of sequels, it might not get solved, and that leads the person to go buy the next one unless they're so mad that they don't ever want to read anything else about it again. A story should be complete in itself. Even if it's a sequel, you should never leave your reader hanging. For those of you who are thinking of writing some books, please keep that in mind. Okay, so we get to the peak of the action. The problem's going to be solved sadly or happily, one way or the other. This week, y'all will remember doing Romeo and Juliet in class last year. So the tension gets worse and worse. Romeo accidentally on purpose kills Tybalt, Juliet's cousin, and then he has to flee, and then Juliet's father tells her she's getting married, and Juliet says, no, I'm not. And he says, yes, you are, or you're no daughter of mine. And so the tension's getting worse and worse and worse and then the plot with the friar to make Juliet seem like she was dead so she doesn't have to get married. And then finally we get to that terrible scene in the family tomb where supposedly Juliet's going to wake up and be rescued by Romeo, and then they're all too late. So that's the peak of the action in Romeo and Juliet. So it doesn't get solved to our satisfaction, but the minute Romeo drinks that poison, we know that's the end of the problem because they're not going to be together, right? Okay. So we get to the top there, and that's called the what? What is that top oval called?
Sorry.
Max.
The climax. That's the climax of the story. One way or the other, the problem's going to be over. And immediately, as soon as that problem gets settled, however it gets settled, the tension starts to fall out of the story. And that is what creates that downward slope. And we get to the next oval, and that's called the French word. Oh, come on.
Denouement.
Denouement.
Onomatopoeia? Oh, never mind. No.
Huh? And what does that word mean? What exactly is happening in the denouement? Supposedly, if it's a good story.
The plot is like unraveling.
Right. We find out all the mysteries, hopefully. We find out all the answers to our questions. That you can especially see that in mysteries, right? Where you get to find out who done it and what all the backstory was and all that. Anybody in here read Agatha Christie mysteries? An old English murder mystery writer? Yeah. There's always an amazing denouement in the Agatha Christie stories. And then so finally the author brings it in for a landing, and hopefully they won't just, drop you on the tarmac. They're going to bring it in for a nice gentle landing so that you feel satisfied by the end of the story, even if it didn't turn out the way you want it to. And that part of the story we call the what?
Conclusion.
The conclusion. Sometimes you might hear it called the resolution. And there, everything is kind of finished up. Maybe the theme is implied. And one of my favorite short story writers, James Thurber, said you should never get to the end of a story and have to ask yourself, and then what happened? So keep that in mind. If you write a story, even if you don't spell it out, your reader should have a sense that they know what happened, right? So somebody did Johnny Tremaine. Was that you, Clara, last year that did Johnny Tremaine?
Yeah.
Okay. So at the end, we're not really told that Johnny actually got his hand fixed, and we're not exactly told what his future is as a silversmith and all, but we sort of know that he's going to get healed somehow and he's going to have a good life. We have this sense by the end of the story, even though it's not spelled out for us. Okay, well, good job, y'all. So now what I want to do, and that is all on page 56. You look at page 56 and 57 and 58. Okay, so when you get ready to work on your paper starting tomorrow, I do have these pages listed for you to read through them, and I do want you to read through them. The more solid you are on your understanding of story structure, the less trouble you're going to have when it comes to writing about literature. Has anybody had to write some literature papers since we learned this last year and found themselves thinking of stories this way? No, nobody's had to do that. Okay. When you're watching a movie or reading a book, you should try to figure these parts out. And of course, the most important thing that we want to ask ourselves when we first start trying to figure out story structure is the main thing. What is the what? Because if you can figure this out, the other pieces kind of fall into place. What's this word that I'm thinking of?
Theme?
Well, the theme is important. And some people say you should try to figure out what the theme is first, but I don't really agree with that. I think that's something you can do after long reflection. But this other thing you should be able to figure out without too much trouble, although sometimes it can be tricky. This is the C word. It's the thing that makes it go. Yes, the conflict. Try to figure out what the conflict is, and then you'll have the key to a lot of the things, a lot of the parts of the story, okay? So we're going to look at writing a character, a comparison essay. Sometimes people call these kinds of essays compare and contrast, but really comparison means to look at the things that are the same and to look at the things that are different. And so you really don't have to say compare and contrast. This is just, we're just calling this a comparison essay, but in case you should hear that in the future, that's not some kind of different essay. It's the same kind of essay that we're doing here. We're also going to remind ourselves of the conventions of literary analysis. So look on page 60, and we'll just go through these really quickly before we start talking about the Little Mermaid stories. So on page 60, writing about literature is considered formal writing. And so you do all of the things that we learn to do in a research essay, as far as, you know, not using the word you and not putting your opinion in so many words, even though it is your opinion, right? So we do that in literature essays too. So look at the first thing on page 160. The first thing, and you may remember this from last year when we wrote our book reviews, is the tense that you use. When you write about a story, you always write in what tense?
Present.
Yes, you write like the story is happening right then. So remember last year when we read Romeo and Juliet, if we were going to write about Romeo and Juliet, we would say, Romeo is a young man who lives in Verona, Italy. He is in love with a girl named Rosalind, who unfortunately does not return his love. He whines and complains like a baby, and then he goes to a ball with his friends and he meets Juliet. Juliet finds Romeo equally appealing, and they quickly, in less than 5 hours, determine that they will be married the next day. Okay, so we're talking about it in present tense. All right. Now, if we were to talk about William Shakespeare, though, in the introduction, we would not say William Shakespeare is a famous British writer, because that would be weird. Why would that be weird?
Because he's dead.
He is dead, definitely dead after all these years, okay? So when we're talking about the author or the actual publication of a book or anything like that, we're using past tense mostly. But when we're talking about the actual story, we use present tense. Does anybody remember how hard that was last year to stay in present tense, talking about the story? It's very challenging, isn't it? And yet it must be done. So for instance, last year we did In Yet Obey, and we want to talk about Alf Davis. Alf Davis is a young 16-year-old American seaman who is aboard the schooner Annie Mine. He has gone into Yokohama in order to see the local sights. He finds himself in an embarrassing situation in front of a restaurant, blah, 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 blah. But then when we talk about Jack London writing that story, we said something to the effect of, London was born January 12th, 1876. Not London is born, which doesn't even make any sense if you think about it, right? Okay. Another thing that we need to think about when we're writing about literature is how we use the author's name. So look at number 2 on page 60. And this really applies to all of formal writing, not just to literature. But when you're talking about somebody famous, and when you're talking about an author in a literary analysis paper, you use their whole name the first time you mention them. So in this case with The Little Mermaid, it's going to be Hans Christian Andersen. And after that, anytime you mention the author, you only use their last name. So you say Hans Christian Andersen once, and you say Andersen all the other times. What don't you ever call him? Somebody take it. Huh?
Like Hans. You don't call him by first name.
Yes. Now, I know people have gotten confused about this because a lot of you have probably read charming stories of famous people, maybe of their childhood or whatever. and the author invariably calls the person by their first name, right? So if you read stories about Ben Franklin in his childhood, you probably read stories where he was called Ben, but you would never do that in a formal paper. What would you call him?
Franklin.
Benjamin.
Exactly, right. You would call him Benjamin Franklin the first time, and you would call him Franklin every other time after that. Does that make sense? Now that might seem kind of stuffy to you, and you might like to try to change it up, but we just don't do that in formal writing. So you will never call William Shakespeare Will. Okay, or Bill, or William, or Willie, or anything like that. Okay, another thing is that we need to think about our titles. Now this is tricky for The Little Mermaid because there's two different ways you punctuate titles. One is to put them in quotation marks, and the other is to put them in italics. And if y'all can do this correctly when you get to college, and your professor never has to write anything extra on your paper about your title being wrong, you will get extra attaboy points for that. Okay, so look at page, I want you to look at the title worksheet that we've got. Let's see, hold on a second. Where did I put that? Not where I thought it was going to be. Oh yeah, look on page 44. So Little Mermaid, if you see at the top of page 44, long works and collections of short works are designated by italics. So for instance, Jack London's story, In Yet Obey, is a short work. His story, Call of the Wild, is a long work. So if we were writing about Call of the Wild, we would put Call of the Wild in italics. But if we were writing about In Yet Obey, we would put In Yet Obey in quotation marks, okay? This also has to do with The Little Mermaid. The Little Mermaid book is a short story, and it goes in quotation marks. Does everybody see that? Right at the very top of this page. Everybody got that? Okay, but go down to the film and media category, which is kind of in the middle of the chart here. So for film and media, the title of a film, a full-length film like The Little Mermaid, gets put in italics. So in the book, when you're referring to in the paper, when you're referring to the book, you put The Little Mermaid in quotation marks. When you're referring to the film, you put The Little Mermaid in italics. All right? Okay. So people get mixed up about this, but there's no need to be mixed up about it. It really makes sense if you study the chart, and I've tried to use titles that you can identify with. Now let's go back again to page 60 and look at a few more things here. Oh, this is super important. Events, number 4, events from a story mentioned in a paper has to be accurate. So you've got to read the story well and make sure you understand it before you write about it. I can't remember if it was last year or the year before. I had one, I think it must have been the year before last. I had one little guy that wrote In Yet Obey story, and he just kind of like made up events in his story. And then he got really upset in class. So don't let that happen. Always make sure, never try to write about a book by watching the movie. That's a really bad mistake to make. Why? Why would that be a bad mistake to make?
Because the movies aren't always like the same.
Right.
Like they might have different things in them.
So take, for instance, the Little Mermaid movie. What if you were trying to write about the story by watching the movie?
It would seem a lot less cruel than it actually is, I guess.
That's a good point, Clara. Was anybody shocked? Who had this as their first time of reading The Little Mermaid? Carly? Y'all, the rest of y'all, Elton, Jonathan, the rest of y'all had read it before? it's pretty shocking when you read it the first time. Of course, that's the version I grew up on. And but yeah, it's very different. And the professor would see immediately that you had not read the book. So never, ever, ever try to write from a book without reading it first. But then you've got to make sure you know everything that happens in the book, because you've got to get the plot correct. And of course, you never make up stuff. You know, we had been joking and being silly in class about In Yet Obey. And I said, you know, what would have really made the climax exciting is if a shark had come up and, you know, tried to eat Alf. And I actually had somebody try to put that in one of their papers one time, but it didn't happen. So when you're writing about a story, you're writing about the story as is. Now, if the professor says, how could this climax have been improved? Then you could have put the part about the shark. Does that make sense? But they don't generally ask you that sort of thing, unfortunately. With quotes, when you use a quote, lots of times, and not in this paper, but in our next one, you will have to put in a quote in each of the body paragraphs that comes out of the story. Always make sure, no matter what kind of quote you're using, that you get it word for word. Never go, oh, I think it was something like blah, blah, blah. Okay? You go and you copy, and that's not considered plagiarism. That's considered being accurate. Okay, in a literature essay. And of course, you've got quotation marks. If you got a really long quote that's more than 4 lines long, you need to offset it like you see on the top of page 61, so that you don't have to use quotation marks there. It's understood that that's a quotation. And of course, in a literature essay, you're never going to refer to yourself. No I's, me's, my's, we, us, and certainly not ever the dreaded indefinite pronoun what?
You.
Yes. If you can go to college and never use the word you except in a direct quote in an English class, then you will be loved and adored and thought brilliant. Okay? Let's see. These other things we're used to doing. Okay. So let's also look now at page 63. And I want to make sure we have time to do what we're going to do. Page 63 is the model that you're going to use for writing this essay. Okay. So look at what we're going to put in the introduction. This is very similar to the introductions you've done before, but there are also differences. What are you always going to start an introduction with? Y'all know this. Come on now. Tyler, you look like you want to say it. What do you always start an introduction with?
An attention grabber?
An attention grabber, exactly. And then we're going to use background information about the author, the book, and the movie, like the publication date, the publisher, the studio, okay? And make sure when you write about that in the introduction that you use quotation marks for the written story. And of course, you'll mention that first because it's the oldest. And then you're going to use italics when you mention the movie. Now, because I'm a nice teacher, I have given you a little Hans Christian Andersen biography. Hold your finger there on page 63 and look at page 222. On page 222, you'll see a little biography about Hans Christian Andersen where you can get some interesting background information about him. And also, if you want to look up some other information about him, you can. And, you know, I probably should make y'all do in-text citations and a works cited page, but I'm not going to make you do that for this one. Okay, so if you want to use my information that I've conveniently provided for you here about Hans Christian Andersen, you can, or you can find some other information. What I think is interesting about him is that he used, you know, he wrote a gazillion fairy tales, and he used people that he either liked or disliked as characters in his fairy tales. I mean, he changed their names, of course, but I find that fascinating. So he used people that he actually knew to help him visualize these characters, which is great. I did not, however, give you information about the Little Mermaid movie. So where would you find that? Come on now, y'all. Where would you find information about the Little Mermaid movie?
In the movie?
Well, not about the publication and the actors and the directors and some background information about it. Where are you going to find that? I didn't put it in the book.
The internet?
Ta-da! The Google machine. That's right. I showed y'all. Did I show y'all my picture of me in front of the Little Mermaid statue? Have I shown that to this class? I showed it to Tylee's class. Oh, okay. I haven't showed it to the online class. So when I was in the 5th grade, we were living in England, and I got to go on a cruise with a bunch of other school children. We were with the military, and it was to Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. And I got my picture made in front of the real Little Mermaid statue that's in the that's on the bay in Copenhagen. So I've had a long attachment to this story. Okay, other people took pictures of Tivoli Gardens, and I took pictures of Little Mermaid statue. So, all right. So the first thing we're going to do, back to page 63, and I didn't put attention grabber on here, but y'all know at this point, right, that you always want to grab your reader's attention because you don't want to bore them from the first sentence, right? And so you're going to give some background information about the author, book, and movie, such as the publication date, publisher, studio, etc. You're going to give a brief summary of the plot that will apply to both versions of the story. Not that long 3-paragraph summary like we did last year. This is like 2 to 4 sentences. And it could be something like this. This would apply to both versions of the story. A young mermaid wants to explore the human world and cannot wait for her whatever birthday. I think it's 16 in one and 15 in the other. When she does, she meets a handsome prince with whom she immediately falls in love. In order to become human and receive legs, she makes a bargain with a sea witch, which turns out to be a much more dangerous bargain than she imagined. Okay, that's enough of a plot right there. And you can see how that works with either story, right? Okay, so that's what we're looking for in the introduction. And then you're going to have your thesis, which I'm giving you for this paper, which is really nice of me. The book and the movie, you'll have your 3 plot. I didn't put on here that we need your 3 topics, but of course you do. The characters, plot, conflict, and the denouement through the closing. And then your thesis is going to be the book and the movie are mostly similar or mostly different. So who feels like the book and the movie are mostly similar? Does anybody feel like they're mostly similar? Who feels like they're mostly different? Okay. Now I'm going to ask you, because you're going to have to put this in your conclusion, which one is better? Okay, Jonathan, which one did you like the most?
I really enjoyed reading it, but then it's nostalgic for me. I can't pick
Oh,
it other than one.
The movie is nostalgic for you?
Yeah.
Okay, what about you, Tylee?
I like the movie better because it has a lot happier ending.
What about you, Sophia?
I think that the movie's definitely happier, but I think I like reading the story.
Okay, Clara.
I feel like I like the story better because it's more realistic, I guess.
Well, the characters do seem very real, don't they?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, Carly.
I like the movie better because I don't like the ending.
Elton.
I like the movie better because it has a sequel.
Oh. And Ben.
I think I just like the movie better.
Okay.
Just-
Well,
just-
one of my girls years ago, and I think it's her birthday. It was her birthday yesterday. I told y'all we called her the Disney princess after this because she kind of looked like a Disney princess, but she never said anything in class until we got to for the first year, and all the way up to the Little Mermaid in the second year. She thought that the book was horrible, and it was just the most awful story she'd ever read. And the movie was perfect. So people tend to have strong feelings one way or the other. All right, so that's the introduction. Then and we'll talk in the conclusion about which one is better and why, and that's going to be up to you. And then first body paragraph is going to be comparing the main characters. Okay, so you don't have to do every single little jot and tittle, but you'd like to say, of course, you want to talk about the Little Mermaid. How is she different in each version? You want to talk about the prince, who really is about the same in both versions. But then there's King Triton, who's really a big character, right, in the movie, but you really barely see him at all in the book, right? And then there's the grandmother, who doesn't even show up in the movie, I don't think, does she? But she's a really important character in the book. And then their sisters. Somebody in the other class said there were 5 sisters in the book and 6 sisters in the movie. I don't know if that's true or not. Did anybody notice that?
Yeah, I believe that's the right number.
Okay. And then of course Disney has what Disney often has in their cartoon movies, and that is charming talking animals, right? So you've got those in the movie. You don't have them in the book. That's worth mentioning. And of course, the sea witch is a completely different person in these two stories. What's the sea witch in the movie like? Somebody that hasn't been answering any questions yet much. Tell me what the sea witch in the movie is like. Elton.
She just wants Ariel's voice and just grow her little garden.
Well, she's a lot more vicious than that, though. She wants all kinds of stuff. What else does she want?
She wants her soul.
Yeah, I guess I'm talking about now in the movie now. In the movie, also all of these characters get named in the movie, and they don't really get names in the book, do they? We have the Little Mermaid in the book. We have the Prince in the book. We have the Sea Witch in the book. None of them have names. So make sure you didn't identify that when you're talking about it in your paper, okay? Don't call her Ariel all the way through the paper, because she's not Ariel in the book. She's only Ariel in the movie. But remember, Ursula is a power-hungry, crazy woman who wants control of everything, and she is vicious. What's the Sea Witch like in the book?
Yeah.
She's not like necessarily sweet, but she's not like, ugh, you know?
Right. I think she's kind of like a businesswoman. It's like, you know,
She gets what she wants and she gets out.
Yeah, I'll be glad to help you out. Here's what it's going to cost. Here's what's going to happen if you don't follow through. But she's, you know, her happiness doesn't seem to depend on Ariel. It's just like, yeah, I'll make an agreement with you. Yeah, I'd like to have your voice, right? So she's not really, I guess she is evil, but she's not like actively evil like Ursula. And she's really kind of like a businesswoman making a deal, right? So make sure you bring that out. These characters are all very different, except for the prince. He's pretty clueless in both of them. He's really the only character that kind of stays the same. And everybody gets names in the movies. Make sure you bring that out. Okay, in the second body paragraph, we're going to talk about the main conflict. And I don't want to read in anybody's paper that the conflicts are the same. They are not the same. At first, they both want the same thing, these mermaids. What is it that they both want? That's the main problem.
To live on the human world.
And
to meet the prince.
yeah, they want to get the prince, right? Originally, that's both of them. But soon, the Little Mermaid has a different conflict. Yes, it starts to separate, doesn't it? So in the book, she gets a bigger problem that she's trying to solve. Does anybody know? Can anybody tell us what that is? More than even the prince, she wants this thing. What is this thing?
She wants to like live with the humans.
No, more than that. Her grandmother tells her about this thing, and all of a sudden she's just got to have it. What is it, Tylee?
Is it an immortal soul?
Exactly. So in this paragraph, you're going to be talking about their different desires. And in the third body paragraph, you're going to be talking about the climax to the ending, which of course is very different, as many of you have pointed out. You like the ending in the movie and you don't like the ending in the book. Okay, so let's look at the nice story charts that I made out for you. If you look on page, let's see. Look on page 219 and make sure you study these charts very carefully because I've got all the pertinent information here for you. You've read the book, you've seen the movie, but these are the things that you're going to be writing about, okay? So the one on page 219 is the one for the book. And the most important thing is the conflict down at the bottom. And so the question is, will the Little Mermaid be able to gain an immortal soul? That's the problem that the mermaid is trying to solve, okay? And the type of conflict, man versus man is very important in here. I'm not sure man versus fate is a thing. But it's mostly man versus man because who's standing in the Little Mermaid's way? There's no clear antagonist, but the prince is so clueless that he really does make this an impossible task for the Little Mermaid, doesn't he? I mean, he just doesn't, you know, he just doesn't get it, all right? And he's kind of just like, la, la, la. Okay. I wonder, I guess they couldn't write. I guess mermaids can't write. They didn't have paper, right? So, I mean, I was like, can't she just write him a note? Say, hey, I'm the girl. But no, because I don't guess they had paper and pencils under the sea, right? So the prince is really the antagonist in a way, but there's not a real clear antagonist. It's kind of up to the Little Mermaid. And then look at the theme. The themes are different. Unconditional love is the theme of the Little Mermaid. Unconditional love, doing the best for the one who is loved, even when it isn't to your own benefit. That's what unconditional love is. But if you flip over and look at the Little Mermaid chart on the back of the page, this is the movie Little Mermaid. And scratch out man versus fate under the conflict because I don't really think there's a man versus fate component in this movie at all. I think it's strictly man versus man, and it's very obvious and it's will Ariel be able to marry Eric and stay human and live happily ever after like they always do. So that's the conflict in the movie. Although the Little Mermaid in the book starts out wanting the prince, she quickly advances to a higher conflict, wanting an immortal soul. And he's just kind of a means to an end, although she loves him and cares about him, which you can tell by the end of the book, right? But the Little Mermaid in the movie, will Ariel be able to marry Eric and stay human, is a very important question in this. So Ariel's also very different. She's very quiet and thoughtful in the book, but in the movie, she's willful and spirited and somewhat rebellious. They do share a beautiful voice, both mermaids do. And so it's very important when you bring that out in the conflict, that the important thing to these mermaids is mortal soul marrying the prince. Now, y'all, it's 11:30, and I don't know if you have time, but I was going to, since we got started so late with my technical problems, there is an example essay in the book comparing, let's see, the book version of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow and the movie version of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Has anybody ever read that book or seen that movie? You have?
I've seen 2 movies, I think, that are a little bit different.
Okay, the cartoon one, and then the one with what's the guy's name? Jack Sparrow. Wasn't he in that one? What was his name?
Mm-hmm.
Johnny Depp. So they're very different from the story. I saw somebody else's hand up. Who else has either read? Carly, you read the book and seen the movie?
Mhm.
Okay, so you understand how different they are. All right, so let's look at page 192 together. This is a comparison essay on The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, like I just said, written by a student of mine a while back. So Genevieve is actually working on a PhD in chemistry out in Montana now. So this has been a while since she wrote this. Let's see, Carly's not quite back yet. Okay, so let's just go ahead and read this. Now, remember, we want to start our introduction with our attention getter. I need to go back and put that in there. I don't know why it's missing. And we do need to make sure we have our 3 topics, and you'll see this. Okay. He that runs races with goblins is likely to have rough riding of it. So is the impression. Now, Genevieve used the word we in here, and I don't want y'all using the word we. So I really should go back and edit this. You might just put a not sign over that so you're not tempted to do it. So is the impression received from one of the most popular and fantastically written novels of the 19th century. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, written by Washington Irving, is a short story. Well, it really is a short story. It's not a novel, so she shouldn't call it a novel. It's a short story full of suspense, humor, and realistic twists from start to finish. It follows the tale of an ungainly schoolteacher, Ichabod Crane, who travels to the village of Sleepy Hollow to teach the local children. In love with the most beautiful girl in town, Katrina Van Tassel, Ichabod becomes the object of hatred of the mighty Brom Bones, her current
Hey,
suitor.
Kimbrel.
Yes.
I have to go. I have somewhere to be by 2, and I have to leave right now.
Okay, you go ahead, and I'm going to make a video of this and put it on YouTube. Okay.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Make sure you read this carefully, Ben. Okay.
Okay. What page is it? 192.
192, and it's listed on your assignment sheet.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Kimbrel. Bye.
All right. Thank you. Bye. Ichabod becomes the object of hatred of the mighty Brom Bones, her current suitor, because he is a threat to the jealous brute. One lonely night, while riding through the dark, deserted woods, Ichabod, recalling the many myths and legends of the diminutive village, winds up coming face to face with the most dreaded legend of all, the Headless Horseman. Presumably, it is Brom. Now, that little summary she did there applies to both stories. Okay? It's very general. Taking off on one of the most suspenseful, ghoulish pursuits ever written, Irving manages to capture every detail with perfect, vivid imagery. Born on April 3rd, 1783 in New York, Irving grew up nurturing a love of writing short stories. Surprisingly diverse with a career as an essayist, historian, and author, Washington Irving left many narratives of his travels and tales from his incredibly wild imagination. Inspired by Irving's ability to capture the reader's mind, Tim Burton created a motion picture of the author's enthralling short story. Released in 2005 and produced by Paramount Pictures, it contains a talented cast of actors starring Johnny Depp and Christina Ricci. While the characters from each version share a number of similarities, the contrast between the 2 plots proves to be rougher writing than either the reader, viewer, or critic anticipate. So that's her thesis there. They share some similarities, but there's a lot of contrast. Okay, now here's the first one, and you can write here, right above this, write the word characters. This is the second body paragraph. So that's what she's going to be talking about in this body paragraph. Because of the shortness of the narrative, it became necessary to lengthen the plot for the movie, thus causing several alterations and additions of characters. Ichabod Crane's figure consists of the same gawky, gangly, awkward figure as in the story. While he is still quite the scholar, his occupation switch to a murder investigator was an inevitable change in regard to the new plot twist. Katrina Van Tassel remains the lovely, well-off young lady who shows affection toward Crane. Brom Bones is still the jealous boyfriend riding a brawny, beastly black horse. The suitor, poorly and humorously presented while attempting to appear frightening, is not as convincing as Hollywood would have us believe. Go ahead and mark out that word us there. In fact, he comes across as quite the idiot. Constantly, the jolly, rotund farmer, Mr. Van Tassel's character remains untouched. Katrina's stepmother, whom the book never mentions, became necessary to adjoin the new plot twist. Enter the horseman. Carrying no head, the horseman remains his usual self with one minor twist. He is a living, dead person. The book implies that the horseman is no more than a myth brought to life in Brom's disguise, but because the director created various changes to the plot, he decided to bestow an actual persona upon the horseman. The film also delves deeper into the fact that while still alive and with the company of his head, the horseman was a Hessian mercenary. While contrasting slightly, the characters of Sleepy Hollow carry more similarity between the two versions than any other elements of the story. All right, now above this next one, I want you to write conflict. Let me show you. So the third paragraph on this page, write conflict here. All right. Contrasting the most, the conflict presents the most striking divergence. One of the few constants that remain is the general fear of the legendary horseman, a huge, shadowy soldier who rides headless through the night, terrifying unlucky travelers. Romance is also alive on the screen as well as the book. Butting heads over Katrina, Brom and Ichabod clash since the object of their affection proves to be hard to catch. Cunningly, using the horseman legend as a facade, Brom warns Ichabod in the deep, dark woods one night to keep away from his blonde debutante. Serving as a major basis for the book, the screen uses these threads as a sequence of events that leads to a whole new twist of the conflict. The story's horseman remains mythical. The movie declares him to be a live, dead being. His presence serves as a major turn to the ever-winding plot. In the book, Ichabod travels to Sleepy Hollow as a school teacher, but the movie produces a different cause. Beheadings, becoming unusually common, lead unsuspecting Ichabod to the Hollow to investigate. Entangled in a sinister conspiratorial mystery from the past, Crane follows the horseman's story back to the days when he was a living Hessian soldier. As a series of foreboding and often hilarious encounters occur, the movie takes a surprising maneuver among the twisting plot threads and arrives at a climax resolution that is faintly more similar to the book than is the conflict. All right, in this next one, we're going to do climax to ending. So you can write it just like that. Climax to ending. All right. True to both scenarios, the horseman chases Ichabod through the climax up to the resolution. However, the author's climactic point merely serves as a stairway leading up to the director's dramatic balcony. Brom Bones, who serves as Irving's headless rider, is placed as a little step leading to the grand action-packed suspenseful chase between Ichabod, his friends, and the horseman. Sprinting to a dramatic discovery, Crane unveils the real perpetrator behind the whole conspiracy, Katrina's stepmother. She connives, she cavorts, she crashes. Using the horseman's head to control him for her own benefit, the wicked stepmother trips up in her own conspiracy and seals her doom with the now unheadless, now actually dead horseman. With the mystery solved, Ichabod, along with Katrina, accordingly heads back to New York City to live happily ever after. Because Brom in the book portrays a horseman with a head, he succeeds in carrying out the author's plan of ridding Sleepy Hollow of Ichabod's annoying presence. Crane's fate leaves us pondering. Get rid of that us. Predictably, I should say, leaves readers pondering. Predictably, the climax, while bearing a few differences, proves to be mostly similar in the two versions. Now, here's our conclusion. Commonly noted, movies usually differ from the books on which they are based. Characters usually share several similarities. However, the conflict always seems to contrast the most. That's true with Little Mermaid. The climax will vary. Resolution of the plot is generally equivalent from page to screen. In the case of Sleepy Hollow, the resolution is altered, but the conflict still carries the most contrast, which allows for the change in the ending. All differences aside, there are multiple lesser conflicts between the two versions: man versus man against man against himself, man against nature, including with these more so in the movie than the book is the theme of truth. As Johnny Depp portraying Ichabod declares, the truth is real, but not always what it seems. Fitting with the twisting plot of this film, this theme is also revealed in the narrative during Ichabod's flee from the horsemen. Because of his wild fancies from the legends he has heard, Crane's perception of reality is drastically altered, making the horseman appear to be an actual headless monster, when in truth, it is only a disguise configured by the conniving Bones. On other themes from the cinematic plot include loyalty, fear, survival, and friendship. Ichabod must overcome his terror of the headless mercenary to save himself and his loved ones, who then in turn save him. Overall, the most powerfully presented theme of the story is things are not always what they seem. Although the more obscure themes prove to be inspiring and important, a few of them should not be applied to everyday life. She should have said what those were. Which one is better? Carrying loads of humor and suspense in comparison to the narrative, the cinematic version nevertheless fails to capture the mind of its viewers as well as Irving did, with every detail of excitement expressed to his readers. The book allows the reader's mind to gallop recklessly next to Ichabod Crane in his gripping flight from his own wild imaginings. I like that ending. I think it's great. Okay, so students used to have trouble doing this essay until I gave them Genevieve's sample essay. And now it doesn't seem to be so much of a problem. So make sure you read through the essay. If you're writing and you run into issues and you don't know what to do, of course I want to hear from you, okay? Because if you're confused, other people are probably confused too. When you get to the conclusion, let's see. We don't have a special conclusion form for this particular assignment, but just you're detailing the things that worked or didn't work in both of the versions, okay? One thing I want you to make a note of on your assignment sheet, on your composition checklist, is this will have the vocabulary words, the literature vocabulary words. You're to mark at least 3, just with bold font. So if you look on page 262, turn to page 262, and I want you to put an asterisk right here where it says literature vocabulary, mark with bold font. Each paragraph has at least 3 literary vocabulary words from the vocab list. And I've told you on your assignment sheet which page that is, but it's actually on page, hold on just a minute, I need to flip back. It's actually on page 64, the literature vocabulary, if you want to mark that on there, page 64. So these are words that you can use about characters, about setting, about conflict, the action, the elements of the plot. And you'll notice when the analysis, that's to use in the conclusion. So on page 64, at the very last, next to analysis, you can write the word conclusion if you want to, like this. This is page 64. So these are some things you can talk about in the conclusion, whether it's realistic or unrealistic, engaging, whether the theme is clear. So these are some things you can mention about why you like one better than the other. Usually people don't like when people don't like the story because they think it's just grisly. But that whole cutting out the tongue thing. Okay. So does that sort of give you a better idea of where you're going with this essay? Does everybody understand? Okay. Remember that when we write about a story, we use literature words and we write about the story in present tense, which we don't normally do when we're actually telling a story ourselves, okay? All right. Any questions before we go? No? Okay. Okay, so sometimes people get confused when they start writing about this thing. So if you do, please let me know. There's a new style thing that we didn't get to today. It's the invisible who, which. You can read about it in your handbook if you want to, and try to put one in. But if you don't get it in, we'll talk about it next time along with the invisible ing. Both of them are fun, I think, but I'm not going to insist on you including it since we didn't have time to go over it in class today. We'll do that next time, okay? If you want to try it, go ahead and give it a try, all right? Okay, well, if you don't have any other questions right now, I guess Elton had to go, but I hope I can get this up on the YouTube today so you all can rewatch parts of it if you need help with it. Any other questions?
Nope.
Okay, all right. Well, have a good day and I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.